Hello, everybody. It's me again. This time, talking to you about something called setting. So, guys, like I was saying last class, and I did mention this a little bit last class, setting includes not only the physical, geographical area where the story is taking place, but it also includes the time period and maybe even the cultural setting. There's obviously a lot of different cultures, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands. So people in a different cultural experience could also be experiencing a different, we'll say, emotional, mental setting on top of the time period, on top of the geography. Now, a part of setting is something called the atmosphere or the mood of a story. This can be defined as the emotional state that the reader is supposed to experience as they're reading through. So, just really quick, an example would be in a scary story, ideally, the mood is one of suspense, one of trepidation, one of we don't really know what's going to happen, but we know something is going to happen. We know something's going to kick off. Or in a romance novel, obviously or ideally, if it's well done, it should be an atmosphere of love, of romance. Either this idea of it's something that somebody really wants and they highly value and then eventually get, or something that they're in the midst of getting. We might see them going through that anxious heart fluttery phase. That mood of would come from the story to us. We might feel them in that happy, dreamy, floating, walking on air kind of phase. That atmosphere would be appropriate to that story. And let's just say we're watching a movie or reading some kind of story that is rather futuristic, that's set, 1,000 years in the future. Reasonably, that story should be one where things are exciting and new. Not that the world should be unrecognizable, but if it's supposed to be happening 1,000 years in the future, or even a few hundred years in the future, the feeling of advancement, of progress should be present, usually in the form of technology. Now, another part of setting on top of atmosphere or the mood is something called projection. Now, projection occurs when the story itself is somehow skewed or colored by the perception of a particular character. That character's attitude is being projected onto the story. Keep in mind, like every person's perception is not necessarily accurate, the projection of one character's perception or inner mood is not necessarily accurate, reflective of what's going on in the story. So, let's say the actual setting, the physical setting of a story, is a wide open field with tall green grass, and there's butterflies fluttering, and there's birds chirping, and there's bunnies hopping, and there's sun shining, golden rays casting down across everything. Sounds like a pretty picturesque type of place. It sounds, to me anyway, peaceful. But I don't know, let's take this perspective of someone who is definitely not what's called maybe outdoorsy. They might look at that field full of tall grass, full of butterflies, full of animals, and see something negative. They might look at that and think, oh man, that grass is probably full of snakes and ticks and there's mosquitoes because we're out in nature, and what those birds are so obnoxious and loud, and oh man, I wish I had sunglasses, the sun is so bright. It doesn't change the fact of what's actually going on in that clearing, in that beautiful meadow, but that character's mood is being projected onto it, changing what otherwise might seem like just a nice scene, a nice setting, into something different. All right, folks, so there's one more part of setting to discuss, and that is enveloping action. Enveloping action is pretty much what's going on behind the scenes. And if you think about the terminology, it's literally the action that envelops the main story, or the action that surrounds what we have our attention primarily focused on. So, an example would be, let's say, the enveloping action of the Civil War in the story called The Red Badge of Courage. Now, The Red Badge of Courage, although set in the time period of the Civil War and set geographically in areas where skirmishes, battles, etc. were occurring, the meat of the story is about the main character's courage, about him finding his courage, overcoming fear, both personally and most especially in the heat of battle. So, again, the main story is about that character's experience. The enveloping action, what is surrounding that character's experience, would be what's going on in that time period, what's going on in that area, not just what that character experiences directly.